We are going live.
See if you get a.
What happened? Did we lose Jason here? That's inauspicious.
Strange.
Jason, where have you gone? He has re-entered. Well, Jason, welcome back once again. This time I'll greet you properly in a blessed feast of the Annunciation to you.
Thank you.
Or for
I'm not quite sure what that is exactly, but that was something that we were talking about a little bit. Let me see if I can, while you explain what that is, let me share your link here. It does say what the URL is at the top of the broadcast.
Okay, well, for the more secular, material-minded, it's only 275 days till Christmas.
Wow.
Is that the primary point of the Feast of the Annunciation? Is the to mark the temporal distance from Christmas?
Well, specifically, Mary's gestation period. The 19th, a week ago, or last week, the 19th was St. Joseph's Day, where Joseph was informed that his wife was about to get knocked up, not by him, and he shouldn't get mad about it. That is why we celebrate St. Joseph's Day on the 19th and feast of the Annunciation to Mary.
I see. Okay, it's 9 months prior to the birth of Christ. Okay.
My soul doth magnify the Lord, and my spirit hath rejoiced in the strength of my salvation. For behold, from henceforth all generations shall call me blessed. I probably learned the Magnificat before I learned anything else.
Ye who bear the name of Christian, sing the wonder that was done when God chose the Virgin Mary to be the mother of his son. Did you know that the Presbyterians have a hymn like that?
Really?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, don't you have the Nicene Creed?
We do. We generally say the Apostles' Creed, but the Nicene Creed sometimes is said, and it's in the hymn book. And that's my rule of how we're going to define who can be a citizen of the ethnos state. I've explained that before. That so long as all of your ancestors were Nicene Creed Christians in 1492, you will be able to qualify.
Well, that will exclude the Moranos, won't it?
Yes, that Jared got mad at me for saying, didn't get mad at me, but he was upset when I offered this definition at Amran that said that it excludes the Jews, and it would.
Don't you think it would be sufficient? I mean, not that many people can trace all their ancestors back to 1492. It would be very challenging for me, and I've got a good genealogy back into the 16th century. But 1492, that's pushing it.
Well, you wouldn't really have to do that. The basic rule, the basic point is that in this way we would include the Slavs, the Latins, the Germans, and the Celts. All the different peoples of Europe, from Ireland over to Vladivostok and from Sicily up to Norway, could fit under the umbrella. And they would be racially okay, and there would also be a cultural overlap that would be okay. You cannot be, the DNA alone cannot decide it, and culture alone cannot decide. It has to be an overlap of the two.
Jason mentioned the other night that he was in favor of the cultural diversity of the world. And he really should have been here in New Orleans last night, because I attended one of the most bizarre movies I've ever seen in my life.
Real movie, or are you talking metaphorically?
What?
You talking metaphorically, or you actually went to the movies?
I actually went to a movie. It was called The Color of Pomegranate. And it was, I was going to present this question to you all today. Are Armenians part of Europe? And are they, I mean, they are Nicene Christians, but this movie was so weird. It was mind-boggling, but it was a totally Christian presentation of people who are radically different from any of us, I think. I mean, I doubt if any of us have ever been in a church. I mean, there's this metaphor of of us being, well, some people would say the sheeple, but we need to follow the shepherd, Jesus is ein guter Herd and all that. But this movie had real sheep in the church, and they really did sacrifice, as in slit the throats of sheep right on the what do you call it, the portico right outside the entrance to the church. And they were reciting Armenian poetry throughout the whole thing. And living in New Orleans, it really takes a lot to sort of weird me out. But this movie totally weirded me out. Color of Pomegranate. It is.
Yeah, so this was a ritual that the actual observant Christians did, slaughtering the sheep, because it sounds like some kind of performance that like some atheistic satanic group would do to satirize the Christian church, like a church full of sheep being led to the slaughter. It sounds like some kind of satanic rock group's music video.
It was definitely not rock music. It was all, and it looked, all I can say is it didn't look like satire. I dare you all to try to locate this movie and watch it. It's apparently, I looked it up and apparently is available online. And, it actually reminded me of an episode in my marriage. I married a Greek girl, and
what about Ukraine on Fire, though? That's the one that you were talking about before, and I'm kind of catching up on that. I started watching that, and that's I have an opinion on that.
Well, okay, that's. This is all related to people who adore the Virgin Mary and who consider themselves Christians. Today is 9 months before Christmas, 3 months last Christmas, if you want to think of it that way. It's really one of the holy days of the Christian year. It also happens to be one of my best friend's birthdays, John K. Nayland of the United States State Department. If you're watching Greetings and Salutations, you probably aren't watching it because you'd probably be fired if you were caught watching it. He has told me in the past that his friendship with me is hazardous to his health. But
do any of you guys know the any Ukrainian nationalists? Because I was learning a lot about that watching this Ukraine on Fire, and I'm just trying to figure out. It's very bizarre to me because on the one hand, watching that, I'm starting to understand why the people that are in the movement that are not supporting Russia, that are supporting the Ukraine side, are like, okay, well, there are actual nationalists in Ukraine and we should be supporting them. And I see, like, look, they do torch marches like we did at Unite the Right. They want to have a white country, for the Ukrainian people. Some interesting ideas there, some proud people there. But for me, it's like, I can't get past the fact of who their president is and who they're really fighting for. It just seems to me like they're not there's no like independent Ukraine on the table at all. It's like the NATO version or the Russia version, and these Ukraine nationalists are almost just like a testosterone fueled pit bull that's like seeing a strange force coming through its door, like, but they aren't going to win either way.
Well, I'm 2 points. Number one, for whatever it's worth, Armenian is an Indo-European language, so I think they're part of the European white race. But on the point of Ukraine, yes, I've known a lot of Ukrainian nationalists, and I'm very, very saddened and torn. I think in terms of justice, Putin's cause is essentially right. I mean, I wish he hadn't stormed into the Ukraine, as he has. But I think, as we've spoken on previous broadcasts, geopolitically, I think he has some solid concerns that are not being dealt with, and I'm just appalled at this huckster showman. Jewish comedian Zelensky. I mean, he's very media smart, and his media operation is really good. But he's an absolute creature of the globalists who want to, ironically, destroy what is particularly Slavic and unique about the Ukraine. And I mean, I understand why Ukrainian nationalists feel the way they do. Their homeland is under attack, but that doesn't mean we have to jump on the bandwagon.
They're going to get decimated in this thing, though.
I'm sorry?
I have a lot of problems with nationalism anyway. It's one of those labels we were talking about not long ago in a previous exchange. But nationalism has been a curse for our race. Nationalism played a big role in World War I and World War II, and what we want is cooperation and goodwill among the extended European family. So I can understand the Ukrainian nationalists. I actually knew Slava Stetsko. Do you remember? Did you ever meet Slava Stetsko?
I know who she is, but no.
Anyway, she was a magnetic figure. She was the widow of the last president of Ukraine, and a very magnetic figure. But I say last president of Ukraine, I mean the last one before the Soviets reoccupied it in World War II. But this quarreling, as a Southerner, I get irritated with all the attacks upon New England Puritans, and we don't need a war with the Yankees. Our problem is not geographic in America, and Ukrainians, they've got reason to complain, but they actually were treated quite kindly by the Tsar. They were treated unkindly by the communists, but those were not Russians. And
I think to some degree, the issue of nationalism versus some kind of pan-European globalism could be a sticking point. But I think in this case, I think nationalism is often used as a euphemism, like legitimately just cutting the BS. A lot of these nationalists are neo-Nazis in Ukraine. I mean, that they collaborated with the actual Nazi regime when they were actually operating. But the euphemism that I'm more interested in, because I'm not a supporter of neo-Nazism, but I am a supporter of white identity and white empowerment and us being able to hold on to our countries and so on and so forth. And I think that that's what's implied by the nationalist label, is that you're working for the betterment of white people in traditionally white countries. And I think that there's an acknowledgement of, the nationalists or white nationalists, whatever you want to call them, operating in different countries. When they talk to a white nationalist or a white advocate who's happens to live in a different country, that they can cooperate with one another, but I think the nationalist label is just like here are our arbitrary borders. In some ways, we do have our unique culture and identity here and our race, and we want to protect that. It doesn't mean we aren't going to cooperate with other nationalists in some kind of pan-European globalist scheme.
I'm confused, Jason. I mean, where do you draw the lines? I mean, you say that uh, you're not National Socialist, but you are or you aren't nationalist.
Um, yeah, I don't even really focus on the nationalist thing to me, but I'm exploring the Ukraine side of things. I consider myself a white advocate. I consider myself somebody who is in more of a civil rights framework, which is different. You know, the nationalist framework comes much more from European history, draws on World War II a lot and this kind of thing. For me, I look at what, you know, I know it's being very sacrilegious to the typical white identity tenets, but I look at what Martin Luther King did. I know he was not, his effect, his political effect was not good, but his tactics, that is what I like. I like Gandhian, Jesus Christ, civil rights style tactics. And that's what King did. And I'm in favor of adapting what the blacks did for white people. There's an additional element of my philosophy that's a little bit closer to nationalism, in that I agree with sort of the Peter Brimelow sort of immigration line that, you know, we have to protect our borders, that there was a traditional demographic composition of the country, and I think that's good and that's proper, and the policies of the country should preserve that. Otherwise, you're losing the identity of the country. So to that extent, if that makes me a nationalist, then I'm a nationalist. But I'm predominantly focused on the here and now of, you know, civil rights for white people.
Sam Dixon is defying gravity again.
I'm trying. I cannot get this thing to adjust it. What can I say? I'm just a technophobe.
You're on a roller coaster, basically.
I don't know what to do with this thing.
Very poorly grounded roller coaster.
I went and bought this replacement to my previous thing because of the sound, and I can't get this to work right. It's very frustrating.
I'm afraid the effect is more comical than anything else.
It reminds me of like a B horror movie, like an old Ed Wood horror movie or something. He's like in a spaceship.
Yeah, I look cadaverous from what I can see of myself. What can I say? I just think, you know, maybe it's because I'm an American and therefore I was born with no prospect of having a country. But I just don't, nationalism just really doesn't stir me up like it stirs other people. And I think it's like individualism on a personal level. It's not something that is healthy. And it's easily exploited by people that are outside the family circle. And that's what we see in Ukraine. Yes. And I just really am tired of all of this idea that, we're going to pick fights with Russians if you're Ukrainian, or Puritans in New England if you're a white Southerner. Or, you see it, they're trying to fan the flames of enmity between Scots and English. And, the Scots Nationalist Party that I understand at one point was actually financially supported by the Soviet Union, which I can really understand why. But we just have to get beyond all this stuff. We have to come to see ourselves as part of an overlying unity of people racially and culturally.
That was sort of the vision after the Second World War of Sir Oswald Mosley, as I understand it.
So are you not in favor of preserving cultural variations between like the Irish and the English, the Australians and the, Spanish, whatever European peoples exist?
No, I mean, obviously I want people to retain their own, their local communities too. But this hatred of Germans by Frenchmen and vice versa, and all this is very destructive. And, it's not in the interest of these individual countries either. People will naturally be a member of one culture or another. They'll learn their mother tongue, as we call it, which is imposed upon them in a very fascistic manner by their parents. No one asks a child whether he wants to speak Portuguese or Spanish. And obviously, you'll always have that identity, but nationalism has not been a good thing for our race.
Do you have any sympathies specifically with the Ukrainian nationalists and what their cause is, or do you think that it's totally misguided?
I had great sympathy for them when they were under the communists. Historically, I didn't feel the same way when they were under the Tsar, and I don't feel that way today because there's no reason why there should be any hostility between Ukrainians and Russians. They are essentially slightly off versions of themselves, each the other. It's like there's no reason why Scots should hate English today. I've been around Scots nationalists, and here in Atlanta, when they've had Scottish functions, they've had people there. Well, the idea that I'm supposed to hate the people of Milton and Shakespeare, that we're supposed to want to be a different country from the people of Milton and Shakespeare, just ridiculous. They want to fuss about Culloden, what happened in Culloden, and all this stuff. We have other problems other than Culloden. We have serious problems today that all white people need to face as a group of related peoples. And I'm very, very, the Irish, all of this hatred that the Irish have for each other, it just leaves me cold.
Well, I had a close friend years ago who was involved with the Canadian branch of the Scottish Nationalist Party, and even then, I could see there were problems. And the SNP in Scotland today is hardcore socialist, multicultural, and so on. Their raison d'etre is that they hate the English, but that doesn't mean that they want to keep Scotland Celtic. Not at all. That in fact, I think a senior member of their government is East Indian or something like that, and they're all for diversity and multiculturalism. They just don't like the English. Well, that leaves me completely cold. A Scotland that is partly East Indian and partly West Indian, with a smattering of Arab, that's not Scotland.
Definitely not. I mean, I've noticed it in the Irish case. It seems that historically the Irish felt a lot of sympathy with the Indians, and that has led to the oddest amalgamation, not just in Ireland but in the Irish diaspora. That you've got you've got Irish men marrying Indian women, in the IRA. And this is really strange. I know such the product of such a union in Miami, and his story is just fascinating. His dad was the top bomb designer for the IRA, and he left under fear of incarceration, and hid away in Trinidad and Tobago, where he met his Indian wife. And this is how Irish nationalism survives today. And it's very odd because, I mean, Ireland itself has two alternating prime ministers right now, one of whom is Indian.
Yeah.
Not only that, the Irish nationalism, as a Scottish nationalism, is linked to this anti-white movement. They're heavily committed to it. It really, people who think that whites are superior to blacks. I mean, we Scots and English were never able to get the Irish to tax themselves to turn their country over to us. But the era, as they call their country today, like you say, has a Hindu who, I think he's a homosexual, a Hindu.
Yes, he is.
Who is their president, and he has induced them to adopt a program called Project Ireland, by which they have a set goal that they want to tax themselves with the goal of achieving 25% non-Christian, non-white population in like 2 decades. Now, you ask me, how do these genius non-whites get the silly Irish to do this? And how could we have ever gotten them to tax themselves to reach a goal in 20 years where Scottish and English Protestants would be brought in and given money so that we could own 20% of the country? But obviously, they're not going to do that. But this is just silliness. And very quickly, this kind of minority psychosis that you see with some elements of the Irish it brings them to this adversarial attitude toward the society they live in. I'm, as you probably know, have a considerable amount of French Huguenot ancestry, coming from a family of 400 years of fanatical Presbyterians. We picked up a lot of strains of French Huguenot. And when I went to France, I went to their churches, and I was astonished. There's still a 1% French Presbyterian minority in France. Their churches the bulletin boards were just festooned with all this left-wing stuff. And the French Huguenots are immensely rich. They're like the Christian Jews of France. They're 1% of the population, but they own 50% of the wealth of the country. But they vote hard left because they have this chip on their shoulders. They're minority psychosis, like some of the Irish do. And they're angry at their culture and their neighbors, and this causes them, even though they're immensely rich, to vote for these hardcore anti-white leftists.
Anyway, hey, Charles, do we
address
the conversation that Sam wanted to have? That was like the basis, remember, for the stream at one point. What was the topic you wanted to talk about?
Oh, I mean, well, Sam had said that he had very specific things he wanted to talk to you about, but I threw everybody for a loop by introducing this as Feast of the Annunciation. What are we going to do about Judeo-Christian relations? And look where we've ended up. I was thinking about the French Huguenots being leftist made me think of the equally bizarre factoid that Marion Maréchal in France has endorsed a Tunisian Jew for president of France. This is very disturbing to me because it makes
rather than her aunt.
Huh?
Rather than her aunt.
Yes, this is the stuff of which really bad cocaine trips are made.
Who are you talking about? Zemmour, I know, is running for French president, right? And he's Jewish, but he's good. I like him.
Well, he's not French by any stretch of the imagination is the issue.
His rhetoric is on point, though, politically. I mean, they will throw stuff at him about, like, I've seen videos where they'll bring like a black immigrant to question him, and they'll tell the Staub story, like, well, shouldn't I be a refugee, and blah, blah, blah. And he has the balls to tell him, no, I don't think you should be here. If I'm the president, I'm here to help the French people, not the world. That's not my job. So, what I think that's the right answer.
Well, I want to go back to what Jason. This conversation, we've been going on now for almost 40 minutes. It's an interesting conversation, but if people are to watch this podcast, I think the conversation needs to be focused, and this has been sort of off topic. So should we go to a specific topic that the four of us can discuss?
I leave it up to you all how to structure this in the future, because I have enjoyed up to a point the free-flowing discussion of whatever is on people's minds. But Paul, I mean, and Sam, if you two, as our elders, can agree on a topic, we can certainly follow your lead there. I just looked at the calendar and thought to myself, this is the Feast of the Annunciation.
Well, we adhere faintly to the liturgical calendar, but we're not wrapped up in it like the benighted dupes of Archbishop Laud. But anyway, we should get back to the subject of what we're going to talk about. Were we going to talk about Charlottesville?
Is that what were the topics that you had brought up that you wanted to speak about? That's what I was trying to figure out. It seemed like there were perhaps two things Charles had brought up. Number one, that you wanted to talk about whether it is worth doing legal campaigns for right-wing or pro-white political dissidents. And then the other thing I think I'd heard was readdressing the conversation from the last stream about whether global diversity is a good thing. Were either of those topics what you had in mind?
Are you directing that to Charles?
No, you, because you said there were specific topics you wanted to discuss.
Well, I thought we were going to. We're way off topic now. That maybe we should just do it another time. But I thought we were going to talk about Charlottesville. I wanted to find out more from Jason about the status of where things stand among the defendants in Charlottesville, and revisit that. But maybe that is an issue that's just been beaten to death. I don't know.
Well, I can talk a little bit about that. I did a live stream about it earlier today. There's really not too many new updates in the cases, but I want people not to be so black-pilled or in despair about the situation, because regardless, Roberta Kaplan had her day in the sun to tell her version of what Charlottesville was about. And I disagree with some of the things people have said that she succeeded. I don't think she did at all. You know, I know what you're going to say, Sam. I've heard your perspective on it, but look, first of all, if Charlottesville was the violent conspiracy that they're claiming, okay, they didn't have the evidence for a criminal case. That's for damn sure. They brought this civil case, which they had all the money and all the resources in the world for, and it was held in Charlottesville, and they couldn't even get the verdicts that they were looking for on all the counts. That's how poor the evidence was. So I think that version of events is very weak, and what judgments they did get were due to the bias that the jury had against the political speech of the defendants. Now, on the other hand, we all know, as part of the small amount of people that know the truth of Charlottesville, and we know about the Heafy report and the police stand down and the fact we had a permit. That's the truth. That's easy to convince a jury of, if we can get to that point. Now, people say, well, the courts are never going to find in your favor. Well, we have an appeal that's waiting before the Fourth Circuit, and if that doesn't work, we can go to the Supreme Court. But I have not always had bad luck with the courts. I've represented myself in Charlottesville as a pro se litigant. I've argued against actual attorneys and won in Freedom of Information Act cases. I won. I sued an Antifa who was screaming in my face, trying to get me into a fight. I sued her under the fighting words statute, and I won. I had a leftist sue me for punching him, you know, and I countersued because he assaulted me first, and they basically dropped it. I deadlocked him on that. After the rally, they tried to hit me with a perjury charge, a trumped up charge, and I beat it in Charlottesville. So if the courts were always stacked against us and just trying to screw us, why didn't they throw me in prison and throw away the key? Why did they humor me and allow me to humiliate the city by beating them in FOIA cases? Why did they allow me to prevail against that Antifa? I don't think that it's that far gone, the law is on our side as far as the heckler's veto. And I don't think people would understand how rejuvenating it would be if we got like a historic free speech decision in our favor.
Well, I think that the bottom line is they won. We can try to, you're trying to put a spin on it, that we somehow won because of they didn't get the verdict the way they wanted it and that kind of thing. But none of that will reach the average person. This is just the capstone of the Charlottesville narrative they want, which will be, they'll have docudramas about it, they'll have documentaries, and it'll end with some kind of a series of words that will appear on the screen saying, but that 4 years later, justice was done when the white racists and neo-Nazis were brought into the court of law and were found to have conducted a criminal conspiracy, and a verdict of $23 million was leveled against them. That's what people will hear. And these little collateral victories, the fact that the amount of compensatory damages were small and things like that's not going to affect the narrative. And your victories in these misdemeanor cases, these little things, they don't weigh against things. They don't carry much weight when weighed against things like what the McMichaels experienced in Brunswick. And the courts remain our enemies. Voltaire said that he said, I lost two lawsuits, the one I lost and the one I won. These things are very expensive and exhausting. I gave a lot of money, as you know, to the defenses of that Charlottesville case. And, the attorneys were underpaid, and most people don't have the kind of money where they can do this. The law, you just have to stay away from the courts. And
well, I agree. I mean, if in the future we want to try to avoid these situations, but you really have to take it as a learning experience. That's all it can be. Is you had a movement that was very naive as far as the legal implications in a lot of ways, and they basically gained a real world experience well above their pay grade. These are lessons that much more established political movements would know, and now they know going forward. But as far as the situation that we're in, we at the time, of course, we had a permit, and it was established law that police had to protect these type of events. So the kind of corrupt sabotage of that event that they did was really unprecedented. And I think we have to fight the legal implications of that. It may not be the fight we want, but it is the fight we have, and it can't be abdicated. But I would also say, the Charlottesville narrative that you're saying they're going to depict in these documentaries and stuff, number one, they were going to do that anyway, regardless of whatever Roberta Kaplan's case was. It wasn't like people were undecided on Charlottesville, and then they had this case that very few people were paying attention to, and it's going to radically shift things. If at best, what Roberta Kaplan is going to do is add some little footnotes to the documentary. It's going to add a little bit more information to the Wikipedia article or whatever, but they're not really radically going to change that. Now, there is an opportunity, because there are many people, as you know, who are sick of the established narrative on many things, on the established narrative about January 6th and COVID and the 2020 election, and about, whether there's systemic racism or whether it's white people who are being screwed over. There's a lot of skepticism. People don't believe the media, and they want an alternate narrative of things. So forget about Sines v. Kessler. That is their thing. Our thing is Kessler v. Charlottesville, and it is at the Court of Appeals. And I have kept this thing going diligently over 5 years. That's something.
What is the issue? To the listening audience, I think we need to make it clear. What Jason is saying is that he has filed a lawsuit against the city of Charlottesville for violation of the rights of the white demonstrators, And so this is a separate case from the one that is that Roberta Kaplan brought against the various people who were in our crowd at the original demonstration in August of 2017 or whatever it was, 16. But you say it's on appeal, Jason. So has the local court, the trial court, ruled against you, and that's why it's on appeal?
Yeah, that's what happened, was that Judge Moon had dismissed it, but we feel like his legal reasoning was absolutely outrageous. He was saying that the police do not have a duty to protect speakers from a violent heckler's veto, which is pretty darn close to a novel ruling. What he was relying on is case law where they say that police can't be sued for not intervening to stop an act of violence or a crime that's committed against somebody. But the one notable exception to that is when it comes to the First Amendment law, because that's where judges have found that allowing a violent heckler to suppress a speaker is the same as if the police or the authorities themselves had directly silenced the speaker. It is a form of censorship,
which is what we really see now.
This is not news. Did not find that, and his analysis was way off on a number of cases. And frankly, at that time, he had law clerks who were friends with the plaintiffs in the other case, in Sines v. Kessler. It was totally inappropriate, totally inappropriate.
But that doesn't matter. He is the judge, and his will has been obeyed, and you're on appeal because you've lost at the trial level. This is all showing what I have said, the futility of looking to the courts of this country and to the judges for justice. You're right. Historically, there have been these cases that have said things like the police cannot withdraw the protection of the law from people they don't like, or people whose views are disliked. But that there are these cases, but whether the appellate courts will follow them or whether they will simply twist and distort things remains to be seen.
Well, yeah, exactly. That's the key.
What happened here is really dramatic. But you never had any Southern sheriff or police chief who did what the first African-American police chief of Charlottesville did, which we know through the Heafy report that finally established that he was the one who told the police not to enforce the law, to allow crimes as a means of suppressing the freedom of speech of the white people who were rallying in support of the Lee statue. That is what happened. But none of that came out in the Sines v. Kessler case. Nobody ever took the deposition of the police chief. I gave money to 3 different lawyers on the express belief that this part of the money I was giving was going to be used to take his deposition. How in heaven's name did this suit go on for year after year after year, and nobody took this guy's deposition? Taking his deposition would have been a body blow to the system narrative. To make that guy sit down and face a video deposition and he either admit that he did this or take the Fifth Amendment. That would have been what we could have used to put an end to the system narrative. And nobody did it in all the years that this went on.
It really wasn't. It wasn't central to the Sines case, though, because
it was essential.
The police.
You didn't even get the Heafy report in. I'm not blaming you, but the Heafy report was never brought into evidence.
We tried, and the judge wouldn't allow it into evidence.
You did not lay the foundation. You can't just file a report. You have to have the guy.
It's not about the foundation. It was that the judge ruled that it was hearsay.
Well, still, the police chief would certainly have not been hearsay. And in your case, I mean,
but even if the police chief and Antifa,
this is a big story. The fact that you had a black police chief saying we're suspending the laws to allow these people to attack white people. That is a part of the story they don't want heard.
Yes, and that's why Kessler v. Charlottesville has to go forward, because I agree with you that that story needs to be told and the police chief needs to be deposed. But that series of facts is Kessler v. Charlottesville. It's not Sines v. Kessler. The police chief and Antifa could have conspired together to drop an atom bomb on the Unite the Right rally, and it wouldn't be dispositive of this alleged conspiracy of Roberta Kaplan's. It wouldn't. It really was not central to the case.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know what Moon obviously is what the majority of judges are. He's a system man. He's going to do what the system wants. And all of this is hidden behind a smokescreen, a camouflage of so-called law. I've seen judges like Moon before. I've dealt with them.
Moons was stepping off from his original position, though. During the trial, he was not impressed by Kaplan's case or whatever. Now, the implications for that, the Sines case is over. I'm not concerned about that, though. Don't worry about the Sines case. If we can get Kessler v. Charlottesville to go forward, and we have every reason to believe that it could, and it should based on the law, then we will have a chance to tell our story. And when that time comes, we need to make sure that the right people are promoting it and getting that story out, because that will be our time to tell our version of history. And we need to make sure that the people that are consuming alternative media, who are looking for the real version of facts that conflicts with the mainstream media narrative, are paying attention to us. That is an opportunity that could come to us. And I think for me, I am going to fight as hard as I can for as many years as I can until I've expended every opportunity to do that. I don't think that because they dismissed us at the local court level, that means that this is over. If you look at the history of First Amendment cases, there are many that were dismissed at the original, jurisdictional level, and then were overturned on appeal, including the case that I think is most relevant to Charlottesville, the Bible Believers v. Wayne County, which dealt with a group of fundamentalist Christians who were protesting a Muslim cultural festival carrying like pigs' heads on pikes and stuff, but they were nonviolent, if offensive, and the police forced them to leave because the Muslims were throwing rocks at them. And so on appeal, the judges struck down the dismissal and ruled in favor of the Bible Believers, saying that the police dismissing the Bible Believers because of the violence of the Muslims was essentially the police endorsing that violence and that censorship of the speakers. And
I'm very familiar with that case.
That case, if you read his notes, and that is one reason why I think this thing is going to be overturned on appeal. So don't be too black-pilled, Sam. I know that things are stacked against us, but it is not hopeless.
Well, I have 50 years of experience in the courts, Jason, and I'm not black-pilled by Charlottesville. I've been black-pilled by 5 decades of in the trenches experience, not only representing the occasional white dissident, which I've done, but just with the courts in general. And the court system is a delusion and a snare. You do not get justice in the courts. And we'll see how your appeal goes. For your sake, I hope it goes well. But I've seen how the appellate courts fix things at the appellate levels. I have seen how the fact that most people can't take appeals. I suggest at some point we should have a discussion about the law in general. That should be a much smaller group and people who are more experienced in law than this group here. But one of the delusions that people have, and I had it as a law student, is that they read cases like Bible Believers or the case of the Jehovah's Witnesses versus the city of Griffin, and it all sounds wonderful. There was a case that came out of Griffin, Georgia back in the 1940s in which there were efforts to squelch Jehovah's Witnesses, and the U.S. Supreme Court handed down this ringing affirmation of the rights of the witnesses to go door to door and to demonstrate and so forth. And then, when you're a young law student, as I was reading it, this just sounds wonderful. I never stopped to think, now, wait a minute. The Jehovah's Witnesses lost at the trial level. They lost at the next appellate level. and they finally won at the Supreme Court level. The cost of such a case in today's money would be about $500,000. So after $500,000 and 3 years of litigation, the Jehovah's Witnesses got the right to hand out their leaflets and go door to door. But the fact is, for every Kingdom Hall in Griffin, Georgia, or these people up north with the Bible believers who can take their case up on appeal to level after level, but there are tens of thousands of cases of people who just can't afford it. And that's what I learned as a lawyer. These police officers working for the system, the FBI, the GBI, people like that, would violate people's rights. And these people would be railroaded into these accusations that one of the favorites was that they failed to obey police orders. Well, the police orders were illegal. The police orders were designed to frustrate their First Amendment rights. And, you've got nice little cases that say they can't do that. But the fact of the matter is that these people came to me, and there were a bunch of them. I couldn't take on a case like that without being paid, and they didn't have the money to pay me. So,
I've been making do. I've had some generous donations from a few people, including yourself, that have really helped, especially at the trial, which was very expensive. But I've basically been handling the cost of this thing by myself for a while. So at the historical significance of something like Charlottesville, and I was talking to Charles about this earlier, I think that I just needed to have a better pay structure where I could divide the burden of the monthly legal bills between a small number of people who believe in the cause and who can help fund it on a monthly basis, something like that. But the way I was doing it was either like I'm paying directly for it, or trying to get like a huge lump sum donation from one person, which puts too much of a burden onto them. But I think that the option of being in despair and giving up is not an option at all for me. I think that regardless of the cost, I have to see this through. This is my burden. This is my responsibility. It does not feel good at times, but I feel like if we are successful, it will be worth it. I don't want to be on my deathbed thinking I gave up and wondering, could I have won? If I can win, I want to be on my deathbed thinking, I got those fucking bastards. That's what I want. I want to beat them.
Well, I'm not giving up. I'm just saying that you recognize I'm far more radical than you are. I believe that our salvation is found outside the system, and I'm pleased in a long range way that the system courts are showing their posteriors to the world. There's much less faith in the courts today than there was when I was a kid, and that's deserved. They have forfeited people's trust. And so long as people go on believing in the courts, they haven't really come to recognize that it's the system itself that must be destroyed. Not destroyed, but must be allowed to commit suicide, as it's doing with its judges. And from a revolutionary perspective, things like the acquittal of Kyle Rittenhouse were setbacks. Because tens of millions of people all over America, the people who most need to understand how the courts function, were able to tell themselves, see, the system worked. Kyle Rittenhouse was acquitted. But no, it's an aberrant thing. The wrongful conviction of the McMichaels is the rule, and the acquittal of Rittenhouse is the exception that really proves the rule. But no, you cannot win in the courts, Jason. It's just ultimately the courts are the enemy's turf, and you even if you occasionally prevail, the general thing is you have to stay away from them. They're not about justice; they're about helping the system.
I would never advocate a legal campaign as, the strategy, especially for this movement where money is very hard to come by. I'm just saying that with regards to this specific case, it is a responsibility that cannot be abdicated and has to be seen through. and it's not completely financially unreasonable. If I could do it, I wasn't even thinking about it. I was just working and paying the bill, all by myself for like a couple years with not even asking anybody for money. So if I could do that by myself, then a movement can, kind of come together and find some way to at least alleviate the burden a little bit and get this thing to the finish line. I feel like
when do you expect a ruling from the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals?
It could be any day. They're ruling on cases that are newer than ours and older than ours. You really are just grasping at ghosts, trying to figure out what their reasoning is. But for me, I think maybe it could have something to do with the fact that there hasn't been a judgment entered in the Signs case yet. So if they're planning on citing that in some way, they would have to wait for a judgment to be entered by the court.
Well, that should not impact your case on appeal. That's an entirely different thing. But anyway, I'm just curious. I for your personal sake, I hope you prevail. But I just know too much about how the system works. Like in the James Edwards libel case, the appellate courts upheld the trial court's finding that the newspaper could claim that Edwards was a leader of the Ku Klux Klan, and that was not defamation, even though James Edwards had never been even a member of the Ku Klux Klan. They can pull all kinds of tricks.
That defamation law is so weak, though. It's our defamation libel laws should be a lot stricter, I think.
I think that's true. They watered them down during the Civil Rights Bill because they wanted to unleash the Civil Rights Movement. They wanted to unleash the media to say whatever it wanted to about Southerners. So they basically stripped out they made it very, very difficult for anyone to prevail on defamation claims. And that was what they needed then. But then later on, when someone sued the John Birch Society, they reverted to a more pro-plaintiff position in that case. And that's just how the system works.
Especially when you're a public figure. And, I don't know the specifics. I guess there's not too many specifics in the Edwards case, but he is a public figure. He hosts a radio show and everything. I wish that he would have won.
They didn't decide it on the public figure issue. What they decided was the trial judge, wanting obviously to please the major newspaper in Detroit for his own political and judicial career, ruled that, well, you can lead somebody without being a member of the organization. And that what Edwards said in his broadcast could have influenced people in the Ku Klux Klan, and therefore it was all right for the newspaper to say that he was a leader of the Ku Klux Klan. And this, quote, reasoning, end quote, was upheld on appeal, and the appellate court then went outside the transcript, and these three learned justices, the highest justices in Michigan, said that they engaged in something that was irrelevant to the case at large. They said that Edwards had Sam Dixon on his program, and Sam Dixon is a known member of the Ku Klux Klan. That's certainly news to me. I've never been a member of the Ku Klux Klan.
Yeah, he's had Duke on there though, hasn't he? Duke is a legitimate.
But what does that matter? What does that matter? You can be a journalist and have somebody from the Man Boy Love Association, NAMBLA. That doesn't mean that you're a pederast. You just interviewed the person. This is it's all gimmickry. It's all voodoo law. And that's what we have in America is voodoo law.
I mean, I think that it's totally inappropriate for them to have said that about him. I agree that he should have won. It's just the defamation law is so weak. They can, if there's even just like a kernel of truth that can be twisted, then
you see what would happen if Anderson Cooper sued some sort of white activist. If some white activist said that Anderson Cooper is a member of the Communist Party, is a leader of the Communist Party, and Anderson Cooper sued, do you think for 1 New York second that the court would rule that, oh, well, it could be that something that Anderson Cooper said might have influenced somebody in the Communist Party, and therefore it's all right for this person to call Anderson to proclaim that Anderson Cooper is a member of the Communist Party? Of course not.
I don't think that's totally analogous. I think
it's completely analogous.
But no, but it would be more analogous if Anderson Cooper had on people who were former leaders of the Communist Party and introduced them as their personal friends and basically endorsed their ideology.
That doesn't allow you to say that somebody is a member of the Ku Klux Klan. None of that matters.
I agree with you on that. I'm just saying that the thing is not quite analogous because Anderson Cooper is at least I agree that Anderson Cooper is sympathetic to far left views, especially with regards to identity politics issues, but I don't think he's bringing on people who are former
no newspaper
and endorsing them essentially.
No newspaper should run a story claiming something as unlikely as the idea that somebody's a member of the Ku Klux Klan. I mean, that should be dead on arrival. It doesn't matter that you've interviewed somebody or even been their friend. I'm friends with all kinds of people. That doesn't mean that I endorse their views or whatever, or that I'm a member of their organization. I
totally agree with you. I just didn't think the example was quite on the money there. But I agree with you that they shouldn't be able to say James Edwards is a leader of the Ku Klux Klan. He's clearly not. He should have been able to win that case. But our court system is screwed up, and especially when it comes to the defamation law. And I think that it extends out beyond that. I'm hard pressed to find hardly any conservative figures that are winning any cases. You know, even people like Sarah Palin can't seem to get a shake. You know, someone with as much money as Donald Trump is constantly filing cases. He's got a new one that's kind of interesting against Hillary Clinton for racketeering related to the Russiagate hoax. And we'll see if he's able to get anything with that. That one sounds kind of interesting, to be honest. But, when I point this out to my attorney, what he says is, well, look at the Rittenhouse verdict, look at the Nick Sandmann verdict. So there are people that are on the right who are able to win. I feel like the Sandmann and Rittenhouse are a little bit different, though, in some ways, because they're young, fresh-faced guys without any baggage. Whereas, a known quantity like Sarah Palin or James Edwards or somebody who's known and has been in the political space for years is somebody that there's much more of an agenda to get that person when they enter the court system. But I guess we will see. I mean, my hope goes back to the old ACLU cases, the National Socialist Movement v. Skokie. I mean, I know those are antiquated now, and the ACLU isn't even what it used to be. But I'm a believer in that form of free speech. What can I say? I'll go down fighting for that.
Well, I hope you're not a believer in the courts, and I certainly hope anyone listening to this is not swayed by things like the Salmon settlement. There was no victory in the court because that case was never tried. But these things are very rare, and they don't represent what the courts are about. And as you say, when it's a case involving a genuine white dissident as opposed to Rittenhouse or Sandmann, the rule book just goes out the window in most courts. And they find many ways to decide cases on technicalities to throw them out.
Jared is
I think that's cases, enough. We've been on for an hour and 15 minutes, and I think that I'm going to need to go to bed now. I'm suffering from hay fever for the first time in my life, and I find it very exhausting. So we'll have to leave it at that.
Well, Sam, thank you for joining us. I'd like to hear hang on a few minutes with Paul if he feels like speaking, because he hasn't said a word.
That's true. That's true. I want to hear what he says too.
Well, Sam obviously knows the American legal system far better than I do, so I don't really want to comment. The libel laws are somewhat different among Canada, the United States, and Britain. In Britain, you have to be very, very careful what you say. In the United States, you can say almost anything about a public figure unless it's an outright lie and a known lie, and the lie was said with malicious reasons. In Canada, it's somewhere in between. Yeah, normally things might be good for the plaintiff if what was said is an absolute falsehood. Now, in the case of James Edwards, he was not a member of the Klan. He had never been a member of the Klan, and I found the verdict shocking. But
it wasn't a verdict; it was a court order. It was a ruling by the court. They never got to a trial. The judge decided it and dismissed it as being unworthy of that. He had no case at all, and he did so under this leader theory that was then upheld and expanded by the appellate court, which decided that it knew that I was a member of the Klan also. So now two of us have been announced to be members of the Klan.
And there was no recourse, even though that was untrue in your case.
Yeah, that's the ruling of the appellate court. That is the law.
Well, as you've been warning, the justice system is incredibly politicized.
I guess maybe this is a topic for another day, but I was kind of interested to know whether you all believe it has ever been anything but political. I mean, I see in what I've studied, I see that there was one moment at which the Anglo-American system abandoned all pretext of not being political, and that was basically at Nuremberg. Our Chief Justice, Robert Jackson, former Attorney General of the United States, went over to become the lead prosecutor at Nuremberg. And if it's bad for James Edward to have been accused of being a member of the Ku Klux Klan, or Sam Dixon, how was it for Julius Streicher to be executed for basically publishing a magazine and some rather vulgar comics, caricatures, impugning the integrity of Jews? Julius Streicher, as far as we know, never made a decision in the Third Reich about anything. He never held a gun to anyone's head. He never bought a single liter of Zyklon B. He was as far from any kind of reality as anyone could be, but he was executed. And I agree he was vulgar. I don't like his style, but he never did anything except express opinions. And yet he was executed.
The Nuremberg trials are just something that are shameful.
Yes.
And it shows how self-reverential the American people are, that we are not deeply ashamed of the Nuremberg trials, that Robert Jackson could go on to the U.S. Supreme Court, having presided over an obscenity like the Nuremberg trials, is a disgrace to our country. They write it up and they glorify him. To some extent, I think even David Irving glorified Robert Jackson. But the specific thing that really makes me want to lose my dinner is when they talk about how the Soviets prosecuted the Germans, the defeated Germans, at this so-called court. They prosecuted them for the Katyn Woods massacre of Polish officers, which all of the Americans and the British in that courtroom knew had been perpetrated by the Soviets and falsely blamed on the Germans. But we're told that our wonderful representative of the American justice system, Robert Jackson, he and Judge Shawcross of the United Kingdom sat silent and didn't join in the prosecution of the Germans. Yeah, am I supposed to be proud of that as an American or an Anglo-Saxon? That these guys sat in a courtroom as supposed officers of the court, and they sat there and permitted people who were innocent of the crime to be prosecuted by the perpetrators of the crime, and this makes them somehow noble? Please spare me that.
This was Victor's vengeance. It was an absolute disgrace. And if the Nuremberg definition of a war crime had been fairly applied, well, Roosevelt was dead by then, but Harry Truman and Winston Churchill and some others would have been in the prisoner's dock. The massacre of between 120,000 and 220,000 civilians in the atom bomb attack on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. These were not military targets. They targeted civilians. That was a war crime, as was the bombing of that civilian city Dresden on February 12th, 13th, 1945. Churchill said, "We're going to base those Germans." This was entirely aimed at civilians. So the Nuremberg tribunals have, in my opinion, absolutely no credibility.
But did it serve to transform the rest of the justice system and political system in the United States and England?
I don't think so. I think it was always there. I think Karl Marx is right that the courts exist to protect the people in power from the people who are out of power, and they always have and they always will. And I don't think a peasant in England in the year 1450 could really go to the courts and get justice against somebody who was a duke. I just don't believe that could have happened. And it's part of it is just the nature of the human being. It's the flawed nature of humanity. But what is the problem is that you have so many people who actually believe in the courts, that they believe the courts are about justice, that the judge, that when you put on that black robe, you go from being a sleazy politician, into becoming some kind of great legal figure. This is the problem: is that people invest all this trust in the judicial system, and they need to be skeptical. They need to be very cynical about the legal system, and they're not. And people on our side are not. I've had people come to me all my legal career wanting me to file suits for them on these preposterous things based upon the idea that they would get justice from a court. It's just, what plan are they on? They're going to go into court and sue to stop the government from giving away the Panama Canal. There was talk about that. They're going to sue Jimmy Carter, and you're going to get the court judge just throw his hands up there and say, "They've won. I can't do anything about it. It's illegal. They've alienated American territory in violation of the Constitution." No, that isn't how it works. But I think it was always that way. You look back at the things that Roosevelt did internally. There's stuff that he did. This is what Woodrow Wilson did. What happened in the outlawing of the teaching of German in many Americans.
Sam, let me just ask you a hypothetical question. Let's say that the circuit court rules in my favor and says that I do have grounds to sue the Charlottesville government and so forth. How would that change your worldview, or would it change your worldview at all?
It would have very little effect because it would have very little effect because I know there are these occasional cases like the one about the Jehovah's Witnesses in Griffin, Georgia, that come along that stand for these principles. But these principles don't count for much. I learned in my first case, the first time I went into a courtroom as a young lawyer, I learned that it is nice to have the facts and the law on your side, but it really is not very important. And this is a case that had nothing to do with any kind of radioactive issue. It involved a mother who was trying to get support for her child against a politically influential lawyer. And I learned that it did not matter. The law and the evidence did not matter. What mattered was the fact that her husband was a friend of the judge and was represented by the president of the Bar Association. That's what mattered. And I'm not saying that somebody who's bitter. I mean, I've had a successful career at law. Overall, I've been successful. but I know what it's like, and I know if you win that case, if you get that reversal, what's going to be the next step? You have a trial in front of Judge Moon, who's going to be able to influence things in all kinds of rulings that are not reversible. You're going to be in front of a jury that doesn't like you, and my prediction is you will lose the case, even if they allow it. You will still lose.
Well, I think Judge Moon, his disposition changed during the Sines case, as I was explaining to you. I think he was of the mind that Roberta Kaplan really had her facts in order, and they were going to back up all the outlandish allegations with evidence, and it just wasn't really there. I mean, I think he understood he had a role to play, and the jury made a verdict, but it really wasn't a compelling case that they put on at all.
But they won.
Yeah,
and he's not going to interfere with their victory. He's not going to interfere with it. And judges are very astute. They often will adopt appearances in a courtroom to reinforce the idea of their objectivity when they're not at all. I've been down that road many times.
No, he was humiliating the opposition judges. He was dressing them down in front of the jury because they just didn't have a case, and they were acting inappropriately, badgering the witnesses. He was humiliating those attorneys. There was no reason for him to do that. But I'm not trying to relitigate the Sines case. I'm just saying that I think Moon will probably not be as hostile to my case going forward, because I think he assumed that I was full of crap, and that this thing was a big conspiracy like Roberta Kaplan had posited, and it just really wasn't there.
You have to be mighty naive to believe that a conspiracy case right from the get-go. What did he? I heard that he issued pretty amazing charges that mere presence would allow you to be a part of a conspiracy. That you can be part of a conspiracy without intending to be one. Did he make charges like that?
No. I mean, he specifically said that not everybody at the protest was part of a conspiracy. What you might be referring to is the jury instructions, which were awful. They were just horrible jury instructions that made it seem like anybody could be a part of a conspiracy, even if they were intending to be part of a conspiracy, even if they didn't agree to a specific act, blah, blah, blah. They were terrible, legitimately.
That's when you say jury instructions, those are what we also call charges, law charges. And I heard that he made these charges. So it sounds to me like he was really plugging for you. I mean, if this rule in Charlottesville were to be applied across the political spectrum, no prudent person would ever be involved in any political activity at all. If you go to a meeting and you become financially liable, if somebody at that meeting commits a crime or gets into a shoving match with somebody, no prudent person will leave his residence to go to a meeting. But of course, it won't be applied. No one will ever apply it to the establishment system people. It will never be applied to the Antifa. It will never be applied to the Anti-Defamation League of the B'nai B'rith. It will never be applied to any of the system support groups. It will only be applied to people that are opposed to the system.
Well, on that cheery note,
all right. Good night.
I think that we should call it an evening. But this is the Feast of the Annunciation, and all we can say, Jason, is in the spirit of the Feast of the Annunciation, miracles do happen.
And I'm praying for one. I've seen them before. Sometimes, this whole situation makes it feel like, maybe I've died and I'm already in hell and just being punished. But I have seen the grace of God a few times, and including when the bogus criminal cases against me fell apart. So I do believe miracles can happen, and I'm praying for another one.
All right.
Well, you have my prayers too.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
And by the way, speaking of prayers, we all do share in mourning your grandmother, and our condolences
thank you.
for her, and God bless you and your family in this hour. And we'll talk to you afterwards. And
Okay. Good night, gentlemen.
And Paul,
Okay.
I promise you that next time you get to set the agenda because you've been too quiet.
I want to talk about social credit,
Okay, that's our topic for tomorrow then.
the economic system, not the demonic control system in China. No, any topic you want. But so are we on for what, 8 o'clock tomorrow night?
Absolutely, but seriously, you be the leader because people have been criticizing me for not exercising enough directions. So send me anything you want to focus on, and we'll focus on that. You look kind of tired.
Okay.
You
I'll
look
give it some thought.
okay. Good night, Paul. You take care.
Good night.